"Ma'am, you are not boarding this aircraft today." The words landed hard enough to turn heads across the private terminal. At 8:17 on a humid Texas morning, dozens of travelers, executives, and flight staff paused mid-conversation as a white gate supervisor stepped directly into the path of Danielle Carter. She had been walking toward the aircraft with calm, unhurried confidence, carrying nothing more than a slim leather tote and a phone in her hand. No designer labels, no entourage, no security detail. Just a black woman in dark jeans, white sneakers, and a charcoal sweater approaching a sleek Gulfstream jet waiting on the tarmac beyond the glass. The supervisor's expression tightened as he looked her up and down. "This boarding area is restricted," he said. "Passengers have already been cleared." Danielle stopped. She didn't argue. She didn't raise her voice. She simply looked at him. Around them, the terminal remained quiet, but the atmosphere had shifted. It felt as though the room itself was listening. "I'm aware," Danielle replied evenly. "I'm here for this flight." The supervisor let out a short laugh. "No, I don't think you are." A few feet away, a blonde flight attendant glanced over and smirked before returning to her tablet. Near the windows, two businessmen exchanged looks. One of them shook his head as if the outcome had already been decided. Danielle had seen that look before. The assumption, the instant judgment, the belief that someone who looked like her couldn't possibly belong in a place like this. "May I see your boarding authorization?" the supervisor asked. Danielle reached into her tote and handed him her credentials. He barely looked at them before handing them back. "These won't work." "Did you check them?" she asked. "I don't need to." His answer came quickly, confidently. Too confidently. The flight attendant stepped closer now. "Sir, we need to keep boarding on schedule." Then she looked directly at Danielle. "Ma'am, there's a commercial terminal about half a mile that way." A few nearby travelers chuckled. Danielle remained still. The jet behind them gleamed beneath the morning sun, its polished exterior reflecting streaks of gold. Across the glass, it was an impressive aircraft, one that represented years of work, sacrifice, and vision. Yet at that moment, none of that seemed to matter. The supervisor folded his arms. "You're holding up paying passengers." Danielle's eyes moved briefly toward the aircraft door, then back to him. "Interesting," she said quietly. "What's interesting?" he asked. "The fact that you've decided I don't belong before asking a single question." The supervisor's smile faded. Across the terminal, a young operations employee named Maya looked up from her workstation. Something about the exchange bothered her. She glanced toward her monitor, then back toward Danielle. The name sounded familiar, very familiar. But before she could check, the supervisor took another step forward. "Last chance," he said. "You're not boarding this plane." Danielle studied him for a moment. Then she nodded once, almost as if she had just received confirmation of something she already suspected. Around them, conversations stopped completely. The room had become a courtroom, and everyone knew it. Danielle slipped her phone from her pocket and unlocked the screen. Her expression never changed. "All right," she said calmly. "Let's see how this plays out." Danielle slipped her phone back into her pocket and waited. There was no frustration on her face, no visible anger, only the kind of patience that made people uncomfortable. The supervisor mistook it for surrender. That was his first mistake. The private terminal at Dallas Executive Airfield stretched nearly 100 yards from end to end, lined with polished stone floors, leather seating, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the runway. Outside, ground crews moved efficiently beneath the Texas sun while the Gulfstream sat ready for departure. Inside, however, attention had shifted away from the aircraft and toward the woman being told she could not board it. The flight attendant returned to her tablet with a satisfied expression. Another crew member joined her, a tall blonde man wearing a captain's jacket. He glanced at Danielle and then toward the supervisor. "Everything handled?" he asked. "Just another misunderstanding," the supervisor replied. "She thinks she belongs on the flight." A few nearby passengers laughed quietly. Danielle heard every word. She had heard versions of those words for most of her life. At 42 years old, she no longer reacted to them. She studied them instead. Across the terminal, Maya continued staring at her monitor. Something refused to settle in her mind. She knew the name Danielle Carter. Not from social media. Not from television. From somewhere inside the company's own system. Maya moved her mouse and quietly opened a personnel directory. Meanwhile, the supervisor continued talking. "You know what the problem is?" he said loudly enough for others to hear. People see a private terminal and think they can walk wherever they want. The captain smirked. Happens all the time. Danielle folded her hands over the handle of her tote. Does it? She asked. Every week, the supervisor replied. Someone shows up pretending they belong. Danielle nodded slowly. Interesting. The captain laughed. You keep saying that. Because I keep learning new things, Danielle answered. The response earned a few puzzled looks. She remained calm while the room slowly revealed itself. Character had a way of appearing when people thought there were no consequences. That was one lesson Danielle had learned years earlier. She had built Carter Aviation Holdings from a struggling charter company operating 2 aircraft into one of the largest private aviation groups in the country. The company controlled fleets, terminals, maintenance centers, and executive travel services in more than 20 states. Yet very few people recognized her face. Danielle preferred it that way. She liked seeing the truth before titles entered the conversation. Near the windows, 2 businessmen discussed her openly, as though she were not standing 10 feet away. Maybe she booked the wrong flight, one said. Maybe, the other replied. Or maybe she thought nobody would notice. Danielle looked out toward the runway. The sunlight reflected across the aircraft's polished fuselage. For a moment, the terminal felt strangely familiar. Not because of the people, because of the pattern, the assumptions, the certainty, the belief that appearances told the whole story. Then Maya's eyes widened. Her cursor froze over a name. Danielle Carter. Executive Owner Access. Clearance Level 1. Maya blinked once and checked again. The result did not change. Her pulse quickened. Slowly, she looked from the screen to the woman standing near the gate. The room still believed it knew exactly who Danielle was. Maya had just discovered that everyone in the terminal might be very, very wrong. The discovery sat on Maya's screen like a flashing warning light. Executive Owner Access. Clearance Level 1. There were only 3 people in the entire company with that designation, and every employee knew it. Her heart began to race. She looked again to make sure she had not opened the wrong profile. The photograph matched. The name matched. The employee identification matched. Across the terminal, Danielle remained exactly where she was, calm and composed while everyone else continued building a story about her that had nothing to do with reality. The supervisor had grown more confident with each passing minute. Confidence, Danielle knew, often arrived just before consequences. We need to clear the boarding area, he announced. Actual passengers need access. The captain nodded in agreement. We have a schedule to keep. Then something unexpected happened. A middle-aged businessman carrying a polished leather briefcase approached the gate. He was white, dressed in an expensive navy suit, and wore a luxury watch that seemed designed to attract attention. The supervisor's entire demeanor changed. His smile appeared instantly. Good morning, sir, he said warmly. Welcome aboard. The man handed over his credentials. They were checked for less than 3 seconds before being returned. Thank you for flying with us, the supervisor said. We appreciate your business. Danielle watched silently. The contrast was impossible to miss. The businessman was escorted toward the aircraft with courtesy and respect. No questions, no suspicion, no lecture about restricted access. The difference hung in the air like a spotlight. Several nearby travelers noticed it too. One woman sitting near the window lowered her magazine and frowned. Another passenger exchanged a glance with her husband. The terminal was beginning to divide into 2 groups. Those who believed the supervisor was doing his job, and those who were starting to wonder why only one person seemed to be treated like a problem. Maya finally stood from her workstation. She walked several steps toward the gate before hesitation stopped her. The supervisor outranked her. The captain outranked her. Nearly everyone involved outranked her. But facts did not care about job titles. She looked back at her monitor one last time. The profile was still there. Danielle Carter, owner, the highest level of authority in the company. Near the boarding area, the flight attendant folded her arms. I think we have been more than patient, she said. If you do not have valid authorization, you need to leave the restricted area. Danielle met her eyes. And if I do? The flight attendant smirked. You do not. The certainty in her voice drew a few laughs from nearby crew members. Danielle noticed every face, every expression, every assumption. She was not collecting names. She was collecting choices. The captain stepped forward. This conversation is over. Danielle tilted her head slightly. Is it? The captain looked irritated now. Ma'am, You are delaying operations. Danielle glanced toward the aircraft. Interesting, because from where I am standing, it looks like I am revealing them. The words landed differently. A few people shifted uncomfortably. The woman near the window lowered her magazine completely. Even the businessman who had boarded moments earlier turned to look through the glass. Something about Danielle's confidence refused to fit the narrative everyone had created. Then Maya took a breath and started walking toward the gate. She no longer looked uncertain. She looked concerned. And concern was beginning to spread faster than anyone realized. Maya crossed the terminal floor with growing urgency. Every step felt heavier than the last. The information on her screen had not been ambiguous. It had not been a guess. It had been a fact. Yet facts suddenly felt fragile in a room built on assumptions. The supervisor noticed her approaching and frowned. "What is it, Maya?" he asked. She stopped a few feet away, glancing briefly toward Danielle before returning her attention to him. "I think there may be a mistake," she said carefully. The supervisor sighed. "There is no mistake. I checked the system. Then check it again." His tone carried the kind of confidence that comes from believing authority automatically creates truth. Maya hesitated. The captain folded his arms. "We are trying to depart on schedule." "I understand," Maya replied. "But I found something important." The flight attendant rolled her eyes. "This is not the time." Danielle watched quietly. She had seen this moment many times in different forms. The moment when someone discovered the truth and had to decide whether protecting their job mattered more than protecting their integrity. Maya swallowed hard. "The passenger's name appears under executive clearance." The supervisor laughed immediately. "That is impossible. I verified it twice." "Then you looked at the wrong profile." Several crew members exchanged amused smiles. The explanation sounded easier than the alternative. Easier than admitting they might have spent the last several minutes humiliating the wrong person. Maya stood her ground. "I did not look at the wrong profile." The terminal grew noticeably quieter. Even the conversations near the coffee station faded away. People were listening now. The supervisor stepped closer to Maya. "Are you telling me this woman has executive clearance?" Maya nodded. "Yes." The captain shook his head. "That cannot be right." Danielle finally spoke. "Why not?" The captain turned toward her. "Because executive personnel do not travel like this." The words escaped before he could stop them. A few passengers looked down. Others stared directly at him. Danielle's expression never changed. "Travel like what?" she asked calmly. The captain opened his mouth, then closed it. There was no safe answer. No professional answer. Only the truth behind the assumption. The silence that followed felt longer than it actually was. Near the windows, the woman with the magazine slowly stood up. "I think she asked you." "A fair question," she said. The businessman who had boarded earlier appeared at the aircraft doorway and looked back toward the terminal. Even from a distance, he seemed curious now. The story was changing. Maya looked directly at the supervisor. "I think we should verify everything before making another decision." The supervisor's face tightened. Pride and uncertainty battled behind his eyes. Danielle noticed it immediately. People rarely feared being wrong. They feared being wrong in front of witnesses. The flight attendant shifted uncomfortably. "This has already gone on too long." Danielle glanced toward the aircraft once more. Then she looked back at the crew. "You are right," she said. "It has." Something about the way she said it made the room still. Not louder, not harsher, just certain, like someone reading the final line of a report that had already been completed. Maya felt it too. For the first time, she was no longer worried about what might happen to Danielle. She was beginning to worry about what was about to happen to everyone else. The supervisor's jaw tightened. The room had started slipping away from him, and he knew it. Authority worked best when nobody questioned it. Now people were questioning everything. "Enough," he said sharply. "This discussion is over." He turned toward a nearby operations coordinator and pointed toward Danielle. "Escort her away from the boarding area." The request was not aggressive. It was procedural, but the message landed the same way. "Remove the problem." Danielle looked at the coordinator, a young employee who immediately appeared uncomfortable. He glanced from the supervisor to Danielle and then back again. "Sir," he said carefully, "I think we should verify the account first." "I already made my decision." Danielle heard those words and felt something old stir in her memory. Not anger, recognition. 20 years earlier, she had been 22 years old, standing inside a regional airport outside Atlanta after earning her first executive travel pass. She remembered the excitement of that morning. She remembered arriving early. She remembered believing achievement would finally protect her from assumptions. Then, a gate agent had looked at her pass, looked at her face, and asked if she was waiting for someone else. When Danielle explained that she was the passenger, the woman laughed. Not loudly, not cruelly, just confidently enough to make it hurt. The memory remained vivid even now. The fluorescent lights, the smell of coffee, the feeling that no accomplishment was ever allowed to arrive before judgment. Danielle blinked and returned to the present. The terminal before her looked different, but the pattern felt identical. The same certainty, the same assumptions, the same belief that she needed to prove she belonged while everyone else received the benefit of belief. The woman near the window stepped closer. "I do not understand why nobody is checking the system," she said. A few passengers nodded. Another traveler pulled out a phone, not to record drama, to document confusion. The supervisor noticed. His confidence flickered. Public scrutiny had a way of exposing weak decisions. Maya remained beside her workstation, no longer silent. "The information is there," she said. "I saw it myself." The captain shook his head. "Then the system must be wrong." Danielle almost smiled. Facts had now reached the stage where they were being dismissed because they were inconvenient. That told her everything she needed to know. The coordinator shifted uneasily. "Sir, maybe we should contact corporate support." "For what?" The supervisor snapped. "Because we might be making a mistake." The room fell silent again. Mistake. Nobody wanted to say the word out loud. Once spoken, it became real. Danielle looked around the terminal. The aircraft still waited outside. The passengers still watched. The crew still stood together. Yet something fundamental had changed. People were no longer debating whether Danielle belonged there. They were beginning to wonder why certain employees seemed desperate to prove she did not. Danielle slowly removed her phone from her pocket and looked at the screen. The time read 8:23 a.m. 6 minutes had passed since the confrontation began. Only 6. It felt much longer. She unlocked the phone and opened a contact marked simply Executive Office. Then she pressed call. The line connected almost instantly. Danielle raised the phone to her ear. "Good morning," a calm voice answered. Danielle's expression remained composed. "It is time," she said quietly. "Please begin Protocol 7. The voice on the other end did not ask questions. It did not need explanations. "Protocol 7 is active," the woman replied immediately. "We are logging all terminal activity now." Danielle ended the call and slipped the phone back into her pocket. The conversation had lasted less than 10 seconds, but something about her composure unsettled the people around her. The supervisor noticed it first. Most people became frustrated when they were denied something. Most people argued. Most people demanded answers. Danielle had done none of those things. She simply stood there as though the outcome had already been decided somewhere else. "Who exactly did you call?" the captain asked. Danielle looked at him. "Someone who will be interested in what happened here this morning." The flight attendant folded her arms tighter. "You are trying very hard to make this a bigger issue than it is." Danielle nodded once. "No, I think all of you already did that." The words landed heavily. Several passengers exchanged glances. Even those who had remained silent were beginning to understand that this was no longer about boarding a flight. It was about judgment, about assumptions, about decisions that had been made long before facts entered the conversation. Across the terminal, Maya's computer screen suddenly refreshed. A notification appeared across the top of her monitor. Internal audit access activated. Her eyes widened. She had never seen that alert before. Not once. Employees talked about it the way people talked about emergency procedures they hoped would never be necessary. The system only triggered when executive leadership became directly involved. Maya felt her stomach tighten. Then another notification appeared. Terminal cameras archived. Personnel actions logged. Executive review initiated. She stared at the screen. The room around her suddenly felt much smaller. Near the gate, the supervisor's phone vibrated. He glanced down. An email had arrived. Marked priority review. His confidence slipped for a fraction of a second. The captain checked his own device moments later. Another notification. Then the flight attendant's tablet chimed. Another one. The sound repeated across the terminal like distant thunder moving closer. One passenger noticed. "Looks like everybody is getting messages," he said quietly. Nobody answered him. The crew members were too busy reading. Danielle watched without speaking. She had learned long ago that truth often arrived more effectively when allowed to reveal itself. The supervisor looked up from his phone. "What is this?" he asked. Danielle remained calm. "Documentation." "Documentation for what?" "For every decision made in the last 7 minutes." Silence followed. The woman who had spoken up earlier lowered her coffee cup. The businessman standing in the aircraft doorway stepped fully back into the terminal. Nobody wanted to miss what happened next. Maya looked toward Danielle again. The certainty she felt now was no longer based on a database entry. It was based on the reaction spreading through the staff. People only became nervous when consequences became real. The captain checked another message, and his expression changed. Not fear. Not yet. But concern. Genuine concern. Then the terminal doors opened. A tall man in a dark suit entered and walked briskly across the polished floor. He carried no luggage. He wore no airport identification badge. Yet several employees immediately recognized him. Conversations stopped. Faces turned. The air itself seemed to pause. Because the man walking toward the boarding gate was not part of the flight crew. He was the chief operating officer of the entire company. The chief operating officer moved through the terminal with the kind of presence that required no introduction. Employees stepped aside automatically. Conversations disappeared. The supervisor's face lost color as recognition settled in. He knew exactly who this was. Everyone did. The executive stopped a few feet from Danielle and offered a respectful nod. "Good morning, Ms. Carter." The words echoed through the terminal with stunning clarity. For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Even the distant sounds from the runway seemed to fade. Danielle returned the nod. "Good morning, David." The supervisor stared at them. The captain looked confused. The flight attendant blinked repeatedly as if she had misheard what was said. David turned slowly toward the gathered crew. His expression was calm, but there was something heavier behind it. Disappointment. "Can someone explain why the owner of this aircraft has been prevented from boarding her own flight?" The question landed like a weight dropped into still water. Shock spread outward in every direction. The woman near the window covered her mouth. The businessman standing near the aircraft doorway froze. Maya lowered her head briefly, not because she was surprised anymore, but because the truth she had discovered was now impossible to deny. The supervisor tried to speak. "Sir, there has been some confusion." David looked at him. "Confusion?" The supervisor swallowed. "We were attempting to verify authorization." David nodded once. "Interesting." The single word sounded remarkably similar to the way Danielle had been using it all morning. "Because according to our records," David continued, "authorization was verified before Ms. Carter arrived at the terminal." No one answered. The captain shifted uncomfortably. The flight attendant stared at her tablet. The supervisor looked as though he wished the floor would open beneath him. Danielle remained silent. She had no need to defend herself anymore. Facts were finally speaking. David glanced toward Maya. "You identified the clearance discrepancy?" Maya nodded. "Yes, sir." "Thank you." Those two words seemed to strengthen her posture immediately. Then David turned back toward the crew. "For 9 minutes, the highest-ranking executive in this company stood in front of you while you questioned whether she belonged here." The terminal remained silent. "You had access to the system." Another silence. "You had opportunities to verify information." Another silence. And yet multiple decisions were made based on assumptions rather than facts. Nobody challenged him. Nobody could. Danielle finally looked at the supervisor. "You asked why I kept saying things were interesting." He said nothing. "Because every minute revealed more than the previous one." The supervisor lowered his eyes. The confidence that had carried him through the morning was gone now. In its place stood the uncomfortable reality of being seen clearly. Not by passengers. Not by coworkers. By leadership. By accountability. David checked his phone. Another notification appeared. He nodded slightly and looked back up. "Executive review has been completed." The words immediately drew every eye in the terminal toward him. The atmosphere shifted once again. The reveal was over. What came next would determine whether this company truly believed in the standards it claimed to represent. The words settled over the terminal like a storm cloud that had finally arrived. Executive review completed. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Every eye remained fixed on David. The supervisor stood frozen beside the gate scanner. The captain stared at the floor. The flight attendant gripped her tablet so tightly that her knuckles turned pale. David glanced at his screen one final time before slipping the phone into his jacket pocket. The review included terminal footage, employee communications, access records, and witness statements, he said. His voice remained calm, but the calmness made the moment even heavier. The findings are clear. The terminal seemed to hold its breath. Danielle stood quietly beside the windows, allowing the process to unfold without interruption. This had never been about revenge. It had always been about standards. Standards only mattered when they applied equally to everyone. David looked directly at the supervisor. You were presented with valid credentials. He turned toward the captain. You were informed that verification concerns existed. Then he faced the flight attendant. You were given opportunities to confirm information through proper channels. Nobody disagreed. Nobody could. The facts were already documented. The passengers watched in complete silence. Several employees glanced nervously at their devices as new notifications arrived. One after another, the soft sounds echoed across the terminal. Chime, chime, chime. The supervisor looked down first. His employee access status had changed. Administrative review. The captain received the same alert. Then the flight attendant. Then two additional crew members who had participated in the incident. The realization spread across their faces almost instantly. The review was no longer theoretical. It was active. David folded his hands in front of him. Effective immediately, all personnel directly involved in this incident are removed from operational duty pending final executive action. A collective murmur moved through the terminal. The businessman near the aircraft doorway slowly shook his head. The woman with the magazine looked toward Danielle with quiet admiration. Maya remained still, but relief washed across her face. Someone had finally listened. The supervisor cleared his throat. Sir, I think this situation has been misunderstood. David met his eyes. The problem is that it was understood perfectly. Silence followed. Danielle looked around the terminal. 10 minutes earlier, people had looked at her and seen whatever assumptions they wanted to see. Now they were looking at the consequences of those assumptions. The difference was striking. The flight attendant lowered her gaze. The captain seemed unable to find words. The confidence that had filled the room earlier had vanished completely. David turned toward Danielle. Ms. Carter, the review board has authorized immediate corrective action. Danielle nodded once. Thank you. Nothing more. No celebration. No anger. No triumph. Just professionalism. That was what made the moment so powerful. The passengers noticed it too. She had never raised her voice. She had never demanded special treatment. She had simply insisted that facts matter more than assumptions. David stepped aside and gestured toward the aircraft. Your flight is ready whenever you are. Danielle picked up her tote and began walking toward the gate. As she passed Maya, she paused briefly. Thank you for speaking up. Maya smiled. Thank you for listening. Then Danielle continued toward the aircraft while the terminal watched in silence. Behind her stood a crew confronting the consequences of their choices. Ahead of her waited the aircraft that should have welcomed her from the beginning. And for everyone who witnessed those 9 unforgettable minutes, one truth had become impossible to ignore. The real test that morning had never been about authorization. It had been about character. Danielle stepped through the gate and onto the jet bridge without looking back immediately. The terminal behind her had gone quiet in a way that felt different from silence. It was the silence that followed a lesson nobody expected to receive. Outside, the morning sun reflected across the aircraft's polished surface. The engines remained still, waiting. The crew that would replace the removed personnel had already been dispatched. Operations moved quickly when standards mattered. Danielle reached the base of the aircraft stairs and paused. Not because she needed to, because she understood that everyone inside the terminal was still watching. David stood near the gate entrance. Maya remained beside her workstation. Passengers lingered near the windows. Even people who had intended to leave seemed unable to walk away yet. They wanted to see how the story ended. Danielle slowly turned and faced the terminal one final time. The glass walls reflected the runway behind her and the people before her. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then the woman with the magazine began clapping softly. Another passenger joined her. Then another. Within seconds, applause spread through the terminal. It was not loud. It was not theatrical. It was sincere. Danielle accepted it with a small nod, but did not smile. Respect was appreciated. The lesson mattered more. Her eyes moved across the room. They stopped briefly on Maya, then on David. then on the passengers who had chosen to question what they were seeing rather than accept it blindly. Finally, her gaze settled near the gate where the confrontation had started. The supervisor stood quietly, staring at the floor. The captain remained motionless. The flight attendant avoided eye contact. Danielle felt no satisfaction in their discomfort. Accountability was not revenge. It was responsibility. That distinction mattered. She took a slow breath. The Texas air felt warm against her face. 20 years earlier, a young woman had stood in an airport wondering whether achievement would ever be enough to overcome assumptions. That young woman could never have imagined this moment. She could never have imagined building an aviation company that reached across the country. She could never have imagined standing in front of her own aircraft after exposing the very kind of behavior that once tried to define her. Yet here she was. Not because the world had changed on its own, because she had helped change it. Danielle looked toward the terminal one final time. The problem was never that you did not recognize a chief executive officer, she said calmly. Every word carried through the stillness. The problem was that you saw someone you thought you could dismiss. Nobody interrupted. Nobody argued. Character is revealed when you believe nobody important is watching. The room remained silent. Danielle nodded once. Today, everyone was watching. The words settled over the terminal and stayed there. No dramatic ending. No celebration. Just truth. She turned and climbed the stairs. Step by step, she entered the aircraft that should have welcomed her from the beginning. Moments later, the cabin door closed. Through the terminal windows, passengers watched as the jet prepared for departure. Maya stood quietly and smiled to herself. David returned to his responsibilities. The terminal resumed its rhythm. But something had changed. Policies could be rewritten. Procedures could be updated. Training could be improved. Yet the real lesson would remain with everyone who witnessed those 9 minutes. Never decide who belongs based on appearance. Never confuse confidence with authority. And never mistake silence for weakness. As the aircraft rolled toward the runway beneath the bright Texas sky, Danielle looked out the window and allowed herself a small moment of reflection. She had not raised her voice. She had not demanded special treatment. She had simply raised the standard. And that made all the difference.